Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode number 44. Thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis, well, either on Facebook or YouTube, to listen to the conversations I have with the guests each week, to hear their stories and hear some of the questions that I put to them. As I say on a regular basis, everybody's got a story to tell. And we're going to hear hopefully a fascinating story this week. As you know, over the last 44 episodes, on the odd occasion, we invite devotees from outside of Britain. As beautiful as Britain is, I invite devotees from outside of Britain to come on the show and to talk to us, to share something with us. And I'm really excited, therefore, super excited to announce that our guest this week, all the way from New York or close to New York in the United States, is Lalita Dasi. Hare Krishna, Radhe Sham.
Okay.
And Lalita is gonna open today's podcast with a prayer.
Guru Vandana. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Vade Vitanute Bhaktim Murkam Avartaya Shrutim Yad Kripat Vamaham Vande Gopalakam Prabhum. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna,
you,
Lalita. Thank you so much. So let's get going. So as we were chatting just now before we started the podcast, and the thing that's about you that's different from any other guest I've had is I hardly know anything about you, which is probably a good thing, which means I haven't been able to do any research. I know a little bit about you based on what a mutual friend of ours, Ben, has told me. Ben recommended that you come on as a guest. So let's start. Lalita was telling us maybe how you met the devotees and when that was.
Yeah, well, it was in the spring of 1967, and maybe even before that, I had heard about Hare Krishnas. I was going to college in New York City and wound up living in the East Village, 4 blocks away from the devotees. I was at 10th Street and 2nd Avenue. They were at 6th Street and 2nd Avenue. For a while, they were at 26 2nd Avenue. And I remember walking down the street, going into the temple, and, you know, the proverbial smell the incense and become attracted. I just remember the very cool, still feeling in the temple there on 26 2nd Avenue, and smell the incense. And I'd walked past a few times when there were devotees out to the curb gathering after an evening program. And I was curious. You could not escape hearing the holy name or seeing the devotees or taking a little prasad somewhere along the line. One day I looked out my bedroom window and I saw a sea of saffron. Just the whole street, the entire street was full of devotees, and they were carrying Srila Prabhupada on a palanquin. So that was quite something. And I think because I was young and open and questing for the truth, these images and these impressions really went deep into my heart. And we were just, you know, up all night doing whatever we were doing. And the devotees were coming out early morning, you know, just doing Harinam up and down 2nd Avenue. So it was almost a daily occurrence. And I remember one time going into Washington Square Park, and probably I was in somewhat of an altered state, and I was with my fiance. And I noticed there was a kirtan going on to my right in the grass. And to me, it looked like a lotus flower opening and closing, like sort of swaying. And I circumambulated that kirtan. And as I did that, I went out of my body. I had an out-of-body experience where I could look down, and I said to myself, oh, my heart is dancing in ecstasy. And just as that veil had kind of slackened, it sort of just closed again. And I went back to a rather mundane existence for the next 20 years.
Wow.
So that was a long time. And I would say I learned the hard way. You know, process of elimination, material life doesn't work. It didn't.
Oh, don't worry. Yeah, you've gone. That's it. You're back. You're back. So did you, I kind of forgotten all the dates, but when was that Matchless Gifts Temple opened? Was it 67 or 66?
Well, it could have been 66.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure.
I'll have to look that up, because I mean, certainly if it was 67, you would have been one of the first guests to go, or in the grand scheme of things you were, but that's quite phenomenal that you were there and you went to visit in the spring of 1967.
Yeah, it really, it never ceases to amaze me that I was that close and that dumb. You know, I mean, I became vegetarian at that time, but I could not understand the devotees. I was like, why did they change? Why did they shave their heads? Why did they say these things that seemed so out of context for the day? You know, this was like flagrant hippie revolution days. Anything goes. And here were devotees being quite straight and, you know, sober. So it was like really hard for me to wrap my head around their message.
So
And
did you meet Srila Prabhupada?
I didn't actually, I think, come face to face with him. I think I saw him out the window. I might have seen him in Matchless Gifts, but I never really. It was kind of like I was doing it with like not wholeheartedly. You know what I mean? I was sort of caught up in my own fantasy world, I guess, thinking about my life. And I don't know. I think maybe I was just into my sense gratification and hadn't really come to terms with what is this life for? What is it about? And as I say, I think I really learned that through some hard knocks. And I just realized it's not just about having a roof over your head, having a husband and family, although that seemed to be the prescription for the day. It wasn't working for me, and that caused a lot of pain and suffering. And it caused also, with that, a good deal of introspection. And out of like, I think my modus operandi was always like, just from the depths of my heart or soul, some bit of truth would come. And like I was saying to my husband, I want to be spiritual. And he's saying, well, this is spiritual. What we're doing is spiritual. And something, you know, past some scars or whatever, I would go, something's missing, right? So I was looking, and I think I had a pretty thorough search, as you've revealed your search, you know, also every nook and cranny, no stone left unturned, you know, searching into this church, that church, thinking about maybe I should become a nun. I didn't really know where I fit. And this went on for quite a while and caused quite a bit of anguish. But that somehow became relieved in about 1988, when in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, where I had grown up, I was back there. I was working at a New Age healing center. I'd studied some healing arts, and the devotees came there with the traveling Mahabharat group, and they performed the Mahabharat, and I got to know them, and I was very intrigued. And one of them took me to the temple, a young brahmachari who was helping coordinate the events. And that was my first real introduction to Krishna consciousness. And I was so surprised because they were devotees from New Vrindavan and they were wearing t-shirts and jeans. And I was like, are you Hare Krishnas? You know, is this Hare Krishna? And I was surprised because I'd never really gone to the temple. And then it just all must have coalesced. You know, I was ready for it and I just started to love everything about it. The cleanliness, the soothing, peaceful feeling, the the smell of the incense, like the four Kumaras, you know, they were sort of impersonalists until they smelled the tulsi from the lotus feet of the Lord and, you know, had these sensory awakenings. So that's what started happening to me. And for the first time in my life, I really felt like I belong here. You know, it was a very intense feeling of belonging. So I hung with those devotees for a good while, and they took me to New Vrindavan, and I just started to feel like my pain was healed and started chanting. Well, as soon as I encountered the devotees in Philadelphia, I started chanting. And actually, my father was very grateful when he was talking to the sannyasi at the time, Adi Purush. And, you know, they just made a way for me. That it just like the way opens. The Quakers say that the way opens. So I just kept going in, you know, further and further. And the further I went, the more blissful I became. And so many amazing things happened. I think I've always been kind of like seeing these visual things, like I told you about the lotus flower and the kirtan. I've just always had that kind of perceptory apparatus. So I was chanting, I was happy, and Kirtananda came. I met him. We did a Guru Puja at that time. And they took me to New Vrindavan in December of 88. And I stayed. You know, even though my children were small, I had been like I've just felt like I was in disrepair and I needed to heal. So this is what started to happen. And I stayed for quite a while. I had to go back to tend to some legal issues about my children and tried to stay there, but just felt like there was no happiness for me. And it just sometimes felt like the material energy was cutting me with knives or something. And I went back to New Vrindavan and wound up really getting into the flow of the community. And I just had like very graceful, blissful experiences all the time. I would hear something in the scripture and then I would see it come to life before my eyes. There was always something very magical like that going on. And I loved the classes. I fell in love with Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm still in love with Srimad Bhagavatam. You know, I just feel like, you know, in 1,000 lifetimes, you know, to just really get profoundly knowledgeable about Srimad Bhagavatam would be bliss for me. So I went on several preaching projects. I taught at the school in New Vrindavan. That's kind of how I tried to heal the absence from my children. And that was a very sweet experience. Well, to condense things a bit, we went on several preaching projects. I was in Philippines for a while, Malaysia and Taiwan with the devotees. And that, you know, sort of brought us up to going into the latter part of the 90s. And 97, I wound up marrying one of the devotees in 97. We went back to take care of my father for a while. That was amazing. That was very amazing. I just briefly tell you, when he was passing away, my husband said, we need to go to the temple and get Ganga water, Ganga Jal, and Tulsi and a garland. And I was like, we don't have time because, you know, death was just right there. And I looked up in that moment on a downtown street in Philadelphia, looked across the street. My gaze was drawn to where there was a garland hanging on a wrought iron fence. I was like, oh, Krishna, you think of everything. You send your devotee down here, they place that garland here. They didn't know why. And it was just, for us because my father loved the devotees. They were always staying with us. And he said, not one, but every one of these people is really special. So he set a very good, mood for my devotional service. And the time that I spent with him, I just was serving Krishna, like morning, noon, and night, going shopping, cooking, feeding. It was just like that was my total meditation, very intense meditation during that time. And so then afterwards, we went back to New York, and Kirtananda asked us to get some land in upstate New York, which we did. And we ran the spiritual retreat with the devotees. Kirtananda's mood was very interfaith at that time. He had these very wonderful interfaith festivals, bringing people together, Franciscan brothers, Native American elders. Everybody came, prayed, other Hindus and Catholics, and it was just very, very sweet. So I learned a lot, and I think that was.
I was just going to ask a question. In those kind of 9 to 10 years that you were at New Vrindavan, did you take initiation from Kirtanananda Swami? Was he your guru in that sense?
I took Harinam. I think what I took was Harinam, and then later on asked for a second initiation, which was given separately, like a diksha. But that was a little problematical because I was sent to somebody, and at that time they were giving Gayatri in English. And I tried chanting that for a good number of years, but it didn't really, it didn't fructify. And I was always asking, well, what are these prayers in Sanskrit? But I think that was the point where I started to be able to discern the importance of a proper diksha, the importance of the potency of these mantras, the ability of these mantras to actually give us entrance under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master into the sweetness that is Krishna consciousness, into the real reasons why we are devotees. So there was always a drive in me to get into the nectar, to get more understanding, more insight through reading, through satsang, through sadhu sangha. They say that the devotees are always there, ready to help us. We just have to cry out. We have to really want help to get to the essence. What is this attraction? What did Mahaprabhu come to give us? He came to give us what hadn't been given for a really long time. And that is the sweetness of Radharani's moods and bhavs, and in this Manjari bhav that is so precious and so unique. There aren't that many Gaudiya Vaishnavas in the world. If you take the world population of 7 billion, we're rather a small group. So my feeling is that we really need to respect each other, get along, know when to be quiet, know how to really have proper etiquette. They say, Mahaprabhu said, somebody who chants Krishna's name once is a Vaishnava. And some sadhus look at the world and say, everybody's a Vaishnava but me. So humble, humbler than a blade of grass. These are the tenets of our faith. These are the principles to live by. So when we are in that right relationship, we can really taste, we can take the lid off the honey jar and really taste the honey. So I think that is what my devotional life has been a lot about is like sensing the sweetness that can just drive you crazy. You know, it can just, it's so intoxicating that you just feel like you're out of this world, and you're you're just so blissful. You're out of your bodily conception. You're just beyond any geographical, physical restraints, you know. And this path is that. And we have these beautiful books, these granthas, and there's so many of them. So I in 2015, well, we did gravitate towards Narayan Maharaj's Sangha for quite a few years, and met so many wonderful devotees there, and got to understand what his gift was, his contribution to Krishna consciousness. And in 2015, I had actually wanted to go to India for a really long time. I was trying to get there. One summer, I was working through the Philadelphia ISKCON temple in the Krishna culture store. And I tried to get my visa, and I tried to go, and it just didn't materialize, didn't happen. So in 2015, one of the sannyasis that we were hosting in New York when we lived in the city said, "You haven't been to India?" He's like, "I'm booking you a ticket right now." Because we've been really like serving the devotees for a long time. My husband had spent 3 or 4 years in India and in Vrindavan, and I had never gone. But he was not with me. He was taking care of his mother, and I went, and I went to Navadvip Parikram, and that was totally amazing, just to see the room where Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar slept together when they were children, going to the toll, you know, Gauridas Pandit's toll, little school there. And I couldn't believe it. I was like prostrated in front of that room. I was just like, this is where Mahaprabhu was, you know, this is still here, it's intact. I felt like I could have like washed the floor with my hair at that point or something. It was just such an amazing feeling. And I was just so grateful to be in India. When we went to Vrindavan, I entered Vrindavan with Shamarani, with Jadharani for the first time. And that was really special, and stayed in their ashram by Yamuna. And I couldn't believe it. It was such a celebration of life. You know, you may have to give way on the street for a cow or a monkey or a buffalo. Or one day I walked out and there was a camel, this immense camel, you know, 10-foot tall legs. It seemed like hauling something into a temple, because no car could fit in that gully. No car could go down that narrow path. So I just felt like this is such a wonderful place. You know, being in the Dhams is such a gift. No matter where we're trying to be or teach or show people, you know, if we're in that spirit or doing our bhajan, just to go to the Dham is really like praying. You know, it's really, I recommend it to each and every devotee to go as often as you possibly can. It's so much benefit. So that was my first trip to India. When I came back, it was very funny because I went to speak to my accountant. He's a Brajabasi in New York City. And so he gave me a little assignment. He said, next time you go, I will help you with your fare, and I want you to do something. Somebody wanted to adopt a child. So I was like, okay. He wanted me to help research it. So then I said, well, can I know who this person is? Because, you know, let me inform myself about this situation. So then it turns out I go to meet this person, and she's sitting with the devotee woman who was organizing Prabhupada Nityagopal Goswami's first tour in the West. and he was looking for someone to help organize his tours. And I was very open. As a matter of fact, this woman and I, we went back to my place and she stayed with me. And the day that he inquired, well, have you found my person, my Gauri? Have you found my Western person to help me? She turns around and she takes a picture of me. I'm standing dressed in Indian clothing in front of my altar with my hands outstretched like that. It's like, here I am. So then we hung together and we met him when he came to Baltimore. He had been to Detroit and Canada and California and Oregon. And we met in Baltimore, and he's this very imposing, large figure. He's from the Nityananda Vamsa. He looks like Lord Nityananda. So this is the lineage that is the Vamsa, the familial line, 14 generations down. So he and his brother maintain the temple in Navadvip, where their deities, Madan Mohan, have been worshipped for 350 years. And it's quite special. It's very, very sweet. There's so many nectarian things that go on there. Their great-grandfather, Prabhupada Srila Gopal Goswami, was a Siddha Mahatma. So if you know, by definition, Siddha is a perfected soul who is manifesting all the astika bhavs, all of the bhavs, the transcendental ecstatic emotions. And he had a life that was short, but very sweet and very much influential in the Vaishnava community. Now, this is, sometimes we say, oh, there was this hiatus, there was so much darkness, nobody was really, I'm not sure that that's really true, because I think maybe it's a way that we glorify our spiritual masters when we find them. But I think that there have been perfect Vaishnavas all along the path, all along through time, and to carry this forward. So he would, Srila Gopal Goswami Prabhupada was a contemporary of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, to put it in perspective. And there were dealings between Bhaktisiddhanta and the Nityananda family. Now, the family, and Bhaktisiddhanta had said that these were not seminal sons of Nityananda, but they were disciples. But there's a confusion there, and best to tread very sensitively on the topic, that Ramai Thakur, who was the disciple of Janava Mata, the consort of Lord Nityananda, was he was her disciple. She asked his parents to gift him to her. She knew that he would be a very advanced soul. But this is not the same Ramai Thakur. This is not the same Ramachandra that is the son of Nityananda's son, Virabhadra, or Virachandra. So there was some misunderstanding there about this lineage. And in fact, Virabhadra, he was actually Mahaprabhu come back into Nityananda's family when Mahaprabhu told Nityananda to marry. Nityananda had said, I'm Avadut Sannyasi, and Mahaprabhu said, you're not sannyas, you're Godhead, you're divinity. I need you to marry, because I was not, as a sannyasi, able to save all the grihastas that I could. And so you will do that. And Nityananda said, I cannot bear this separation. Only if, I can't bear this separation from you. And then they just resolved that Mahaprabhu would come back as the son of Nityananda, which was in fact what happened. And Virabhadra he's an incarnation of Mahaprabhu and Shirodakshaya Vishnu. And he understood that he was Vishnu Tattva. And so Nitai had several children, and Virabhadra had sons. He had 3 sons, Gopi Janavallabha and Gopi Janavallabha, Ramakrishna, and Ramachandra. And this is the 3rd generation from Lord Nityananda. So this Ramachandra is not the same as Ramai Thakur, who was also a Ramachandra. He was the disciple of Janavama. This Ramachandra maybe even was named for him, but came at a later date. And so each of Virabhadra's sons took a different direction and established their seat in a different place in Bengal. Gopi Janavallabha was in Ekachakra, and Ramakrishna was in one of the Pur in Bengal, and Ramachandra went to Navadvip. That's the line that is now today in Navadvip. So they know, the Vaishnavas keep very good records. They know that these were the seminal sons of Virabhadra. They're all from the same Gotra. They're not different Gotras. They're not disciples. They were disciples and also sons. And so that's kind of the mood in this line, is that the father's teaching the son, and the noble son, the worthy son, is taking up the path. And they've been in Bengal over 750 years preaching in a very sweet way. The preaching has evolved over time. Gopal Goswami ji innovated, combining philosophical lecture with Leela Kirtan, and the whole art and artistry of the Bengali presentation of Gaur Leela, Krishna Leela, is very, very sweet. It's so remarkable. You really see culture at its best there. They have the original musical forms. They're putting on delightful dramas every year. For the last 90 years, they're having what they call Guru Niryan Festival at their temple in Navadvip, Radha Madan Mohan Temple, where for 10 days after Kartik, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Goswami's mother, who was his guru. In this line also, the women are initiating their sons. They are giving Diksha. Doesn't mean that they're the teachers of Bhagavad Dharma, as every mother should be, but they're not, the sole teacher. But they, as gurus, they are having a heavy influence in the family. And so there's no question of should women give initiation or not, because in this line, it's been going on for hundreds of years. So it's absolutely non-controversial. And it's very beautiful to see how this is really nobling to the offspring, and equally to the mothers. So I'm very encouraged by the role of women. I'm very encouraged by the way this family has treated me. Just, it's the sweetest love that I've ever really felt, because it's not just material. Srila Nityagopal Goswami ji told me when he gave me Diksha, he said, I am taking responsibility for you materially and spiritually. And it doesn't mean that he's hovering over me in any way. He's given me ample room to grow and a real sense of what freedom is in life, which I feel is very important for devotees to know. And, just give everybody ample space. And if there's something controversial, you don't touch on it. You just be sensitive and you coexist. And this is how Gaudiya Vaishnavas have thrived since the times of Mahaprabhu and before, by supremely affectionate etiquette, by proper etiquette, sadachar, cleanliness, respect. And so there's no politics, there's no scandals. It's like a pure experience just to go there and live and learn with these great souls. And he's continued to come out into the West and wants to preach more in the West. We went to Glastonbury in 2018, and then he was at the London Sankirtan Fest this year, at the end of July, and he spoke there. And this kata is so sweet, and it goes so deep. I'm just coming to understand, because he's very dedicated to giving devotees a sound foundation. He wants us to understand. Keep your body and your hands sacred. Perform your devotional service impeccably as possible, whether you're tending to your deities or cooking for the Vaishnavas or whatever your service is. Maintain decorum, maintain a good way of doing things, conscious way. And there's plenty of time. He always says, have full patience. These are lessons that we in the West as devotees haven't really had to confront all the time, and haven't grown in some dimensions psychologically matured, as much as possible. He also said, he looks at us and he thinks we don't have roots in the West, especially in America. That's obvious. America is a little bit just, flapping in the breeze sometimes. Europe maybe, a little more entrenched, but he sees this, and there's a necessity as devotees to have a secure foundation before you can really enter into all the nectar. Let your mind be clear. Let the soul needs a good guide. The soul needs good parameters for behavior. And this is not always something in the West that we're like so great at. Even our cleanliness, our sadachar, these are themes that can get a little bit onerous for people who were raised like as Malechas. This is why some Vaishnavas didn't want to come to the West, and why it was really brave of Srila Prabhupada to A.C. Bhakti Swami Prabhupada to come and cut through all that, as they say, cut through those jungles. So,
just to say, Lalita, that for me, the last 3 years, it's been a real learning curve for me in understanding my own spiritual heritage, in terms of understanding and the whole Gaudiya Vaishnava family, if that's possible. When my book came out last year, and one of the devotees I interviewed for the book was a devotee called Dalji, who you're nodding your head, you must know him, and he lives, I think he lives in North Wales, which is in the UK, but spends a lot of time in India. And I'd never really spoken to anyone from the Nityananda line before, not really to that extent. And he was using expressions like the traditional line, and I was thinking, oh, what do you mean by that? Because my kind of spiritual background in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is in ISKCON. And, I was forming the view that ISKCON, in one sense, the philosophy of ISKCON is very old. The institution is new, but and then I think what I'm trying to say without upsetting any listeners or viewers is that actually ISKCON is quite a radically new thing in terms of, you look at the recent lineage of ISKCON in terms of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the Sarasvat line being kind of a cutoff or a breakaway or you know, something kind of new. A lot of devotees might disagree with my wording there, but in terms of creating something new from the Nityananda line, you know, I was never able to get a clear answer from my own spiritual teachers over where we're actually from, but yeah, and that was new for me to understand that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually created something new with the creation of the Gaudiya Mat, you know, and that actually, if you look at the line that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was in terms of his Diksha Guru, also in terms of the Diksha Guru of Gaurkishore Das Babaji, they were actually from the Nityananda line. And actually this
Right.
new Sarasvat line, so Bipin Bahara Goswami was the Diksha Guru to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I've forgotten the name of the Diksha Guru to Gaurkishore Das Babaji, but he was also in the Nityananda line. Yogi?
Advaita line.
Yeah.
Gaurkishore Babaji was in the line of Advaita Charya.
Okay. So anyway, it was all a big learning curve for me. And then when Daoji was using terms like the traditional line or lines, I kind of understood it more and knew what he was talking about. So what you've said to me makes perfect sense. You know, I have no reason to doubt it or disagree with it. You know, I understand how I fit into linking with that, and other people in Western Vaishnavism, I mean, I've made that turn up link with that too. I'm conscious I cut you off there. You were saying you were saying fascinating things, particularly around the role of women. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's deal with this issue because it's timely. It's come up at the right time. When Mahaprabhu was getting ready to depart, he gave Lord Nityananda and Advaita Charya the go-ahead to start their lineage, to start their dynasty, you know, but also their parivar, which means you're not a member of the family, but you are a direct disciple. And with the blessing that these teachings would remain intact, which to me is a great measure of security, because you've got that coming from Mahaprabhu himself through Nityananda and Advaita, and with the understanding that these teachings will remain intact. So yes, you have, and we could say traditional or orthodox line where certain precepts were given. You know, they're not allowed to, in Nityananda line, they're not, the direct descendants are not allowed to take Babaji Vesh, for instance. The understanding was that not only is sannyas not recommended in this age, it is actually prohibited in the age of Kali to take sannyas, because of the problems that we've seen, you know, that it's such a hard ashram to handle, and it comes with so much temptation for pratista, fame, adoration, and distinction. Hard for, now Mahaprabhu gave this gift, this Radhadasyam, this Manjari Bhav, which requires a very soft and yielding nature. A Manjari is like the Manjari on Tulsi Devi. If Tulsi Devi is blowing in the wind, so is the Manjari. In other words, if Radha is feeling something, her Manjaris are feeling the same thing. They have no separate interest. They're just feeling what Radha feels and ready to serve her. They are like an incarnation of service. They are the maid servants of Radharani. They're young girls. And this is like difficult, I think, for the average male to wrap his head around. It's quite a challenge. And also female, you know, whatever ego we're carrying, whatever false ego we're carrying, it's thick, it's dense, and it needs to be cut apart. You know, we need to emerge from that and not be afraid. So sannyas is not desired in this age, and nobody was supposed to wear saffron. So they kind of took exception to this from this lineage when they saw what Bhaktisiddhanta was doing. There was a rift. You know, this was like, this is not Mahaprabhu's instruction to us. But they had their mission, you know, and we see what it has accomplished. Somebody needed to come to the West. Somebody needed to get our attention, you know, and a lot of the traditional lines, the lines who have been intermingling, very open amongst themselves, and practicing, preaching, teaching in the Dhams were, you know, they were just put off by this. They were bewildered by it. Why are they doing this? But yet Bhaktivinoda Thakur had this very specific mission. I understood that he passed away, and when his wife was passing away, she was prevailing upon Bhaktisiddhanta, please carry this, your father's mission, out. So there was a strong feeling that this needed to happen. And who's to say that's not divinely inspired? You know, that's like, look at all of us. How would we have been gathered up? Nobody else was really coming to the West. You know, here and there. So it's kind of like custom made for people like us. And but at the same time, it's very helpful. And in terms of preaching in the West, I was going to address this point. It may seem counterintuitive, but in my mind, finding out more, growing some roots within this bhakti tradition, within this Gaudiya Vaishnav culture and context, going to India, seeing how they live, how they preach. I had such a wonderful experience, so sweet. I'm still like, made so many friends, had so many wonderful experiences when I traveled with, I call him Baba, Prabhupada Nityagopal Goswami ji. You know, he was the perfect host. He saw to my needs all the time, and everybody else did too. You know, they took me to a place in Bangladesh where it was Mahaprabhu's grandmother's home. It was Jagannath Mishra's ancestral home.
Wow.
And they have a temple there that's quite pucka. The temple is newly poured concrete, and some murtis of Sukha, I think Sukha Devi or Sudha Devi, his grandmother, and her husband. I forget his name. I'm sorry, but it's called Dhaka Dakin in Sylhet, an ancient city of deep culture in the depths of Bangladesh, in the eastern part of Bangladesh. And they took me there, but then next to it are the ruins of the ancestral home. And, you know, you had to climb up really like steep and overgrown steps, and everything up on the top was like crumbling. Nobody is paying attention to it and preserving it. But I found it the most amazing place. I just tapped into some really high vibrations there. I felt like these were brahmanas. They were sitting up here. It's like kind of up on a hill. His grandmother had a dream that Jagannath Mishra was going to have the Supreme Personality of Godhead as his son. So these things are known, and this is the sweetness of when you really get into a culture, you can appreciate it more and more. And you know, you just taste this honey, like you feel it firsthand. And then you know that these sadhus are privy to a lot of information. They've read all these granthas. They know who the sadhus are. They've studied since childhood with scholars. and, you know, learned people who have been passing around all the inner meanings of Leelas, of who is Mahakuram, is an Angamanjari. So these are truths that have been expounded and taught and meditated upon. And this is a living religion. I mean, when we go into a meditation, it's not static, it's not book learning, it's not just knowledge. You know, I was going to mention, like when Vyasadeva was sitting there and he'd compiled the Vedas and he'd done this tremendous, prodigious work, dividing the Vedas into 4 and writing it all down, whatever, you know, and he was despondent. Why was he despondent? Narada comes by. He says, well, how's it going, Vyasadeva? He's like, I don't know. I don't feel good, you know? And he said, well, let's see why. Okay, he's the spiritual master. Okay, let's understand. Why don't you feel satisfied? You've done all this work, okay, but Narada tells him, you have thrown the Kali Jivas into an ocean of knowledge, and you've not given them the real nectar. You've not given them the lotus feet of Krishna. You've not expounded on the glories of Krishna, where the taste is, where the beauty is, where all of the real purpose for our being created, alive, and in a relationship with divinity. This is why it exists, so that we can know who is Krishna and glorify him and do kirtan of his name. Kirtan is a really good way. So Vyas did that, you know, when we have Srimad Bhagavatam. But, you know, Sukadev was telling Parikshit, you have to give, you know, people want to be happy. You know, Parikshit was asking him, what mistake have we made? Why I have all this wealth and everything and still I'm not happy, and I look around and I see others aren't really happy. What's our error? Where do we go off? And Parikshit said, yes, everybody wants eternal love and eternal happiness, but to get it, you have to glorify Krishna. And he didn't mention so much, but he said, you have to do kirtan of the holy names. You know, they didn't mention Radharani. Radharani was like, she was like a little bit protected at that time, shy, and not really being revealed. But, you know, it started then. And then with Mahaprabhu, it came out in the open. You know, this is what the living beings are really meant for. This is our relationship. We can't really approach Krishna directly, nor should we want to, because Radha really has the secrets to loving Krishna. Just the way we go to Guru, how do I serve? How do I love Krishna? We go to Radharani. Guru takes us to Radharani. Our Guru Manjari takes us to her, takes us to Ananga Manjari, and engages us if he sees that we are qualified in Radharani's service. And this is where we find our bliss. This is very interesting, you know, how that we can't, it's not a self. You know, others love Krishna. They're the ones that are the Ashraya of Prem. And this is, in fact, this position of Nityananda. Nityananda is the treasurer of Prem. He called out Raghunath Das Goswami. He punished him. He made him put on a festival for all the devotees. He called him a thief because he said, you went to Mahaprabhu, you know, you loved Mahaprabhu, you went to Mahaprabhu, but Mahaprabhu sent him to me because Mahaprabhu can't give prem of himself. You know, you have to get that prem from somebody who is gathered it, who is holding it, right? So it's a really beautiful thing, how we are the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, how it's meant to come to us is so sweet. It's like they say, the mangoes being passed down from the tree. Every stage, it gets sweeter. And this is how we're meant to live. This is what really gives our soul great satisfaction, that we experience bliss when we are connected in bliss to those who are serving the Lord. So we have sadhana, we have kripa. We need the mercy of devotees. Without the mercy of devotees, of Vaishnavas, we don't get the mercy of Radha or Krishna. This is our path. This is our path. It's a humble path, but it's also alive and vibrant and very sweet, because these are the relationships that we can understand with the senses that we have. And until we develop our spiritual senses, until we understand what is bhakti, bhakti is not just knowing who Krishna is. Bhakti is actually serving devotion, serving devotees, serving Radharani. Bhakti is a superior tattva. There's millions and millions of tattvas. Bhakti is superior tattva to Krishna tattva. If you follow what I mean, we have to go to those who are the abode of the love that we're seeking. We can't just go to the object of that love, because, how can I make you love me as much as I want to be loved? No, it's like through somebody else that you know what I mean? I don't really mean to pull myself into it. I actually wanted to keep myself out of the center of this talk. And I think one of the things, when I first took up Krishna consciousness, I was in New Vrindavan, and I pulled this book off the shelf in the library. It was a book by G.D. Birla, Ghanshyam Das Birla, who was Gandhi's secretary, a close associate. Gandhi was staying in his house when he was assassinated. And they had asked him to write his memoirs. So they say, oh, this guy knows Gandhi, let's hear what he has to say. And what he said was very interesting, which really clued me in on the direction of Krishna consciousness. He said, it's really not about me. I'm insignificant. My life is insignificant. It's really about Krishna. So he wrote this amazing book called Alive in Krishna, just a small book, in which he portrays Krishna's role in the Battle of Kurukshetra. And that Krishna is alive. He didn't figure out everything beforehand. It's not a static process. It's dynamic. Krishna was there, engaged in the battle. He knew, these soldiers will be dead by the end of this, but did he know every move that he was going to make? Birla says no, right? I don't know, but I know that Krishna consciousness is a dynamic process, and it's a joyful process, and there's ways to advance, and if we're not advancing, like Vyasadeva asked Narada, why am I so unsatisfied? Narada was able to tell him, this is the role of the spiritual master. And so if you have a good one and you're really, getting to this nectar, then you're really like, a lucky star in this firmament of devotees that we have, because that's it. You're all about your guru, and what can I get, from my guru, what can I give? So it's this great reciprocation, and the more you give, the more you get. There have been devotees who didn't know how to read and write. They didn't know the purport of the Shastra, and the gurus are sitting around. This is a story from Radha Raman temple in Vrindavan. And they're sitting around and the gurus are trying to figure out the purport to one verse. And the sevak, who has been serving his guru faithfully for his whole life since he was a child, he resolves the problem. And all of the gurus, they're like, whoa, how did he know how to resolve this question? Because questions come up with philosophical points in tattva and understanding. And he said, I was just serving, and I didn't know how to read, and I wanted to read these books. I didn't know how to write, and I just did my service, and I did my service, and I just served faithfully and faithfully until one day I went to the temple and I could read. I just looked, there's plaques up in Radharaman temple. And he said, I stopped one of the devotees there and I said, okay, listen, is this right? Is this what it says? And the devotee said, yes. He said, well, then I can read. So I would go in after all my work was done and read all these books. And then he was able actually to solve the problem that the sadhus were facing. You know what I mean? It comes by grace. It comes by selfless, surrendered service. If we surrender, the more that we surrender, there's symptoms of surrender, the more we engage our minds and hearts, the more we act from the core of our heart in Krishna consciousness, in our service. I mean, sometimes we don't know, but if we put ourselves into it wholeheartedly, we cannot measure the benefit. It's just beyond our calculations. It's just the nectar is there. It's flowing. Bhakti is flowing like a river, like a waterfall, like a shower. And Bhakti is independent. She's even independent of Krishna. And, through the mercy of our Gurudev and of our devotees that we know, we get the taste, we get the understanding, and the arrangement is always being made for our welfare. I really wanted to say that. Times in my life where I don't know how I wound up in a certain place, but then I'm there and I'm seeing what's going on, and I'm like, Krishna, how do you know? How do you know what to do with me? And you just get used to that after a while, and they know. They are our guides. They are our moons, they are our suns, they are everything. And all these truths are so sweet and wonderful. There's not an end to it. And we're like bees, seeking the nectar. This is what our, like Mahaprabhu said in the Shikshastakam, this is the nectar for which we are always anxious, through the chanting of the holy name, through doing diligent sadhana, for having good sadachar, serving, chanting, hearing. This is our life, and fortunately, I think I've just kind of like just lived out some of my restlessness, so that now I'm like at a place. I was 74 the other day where I just, I got to sit still and chant the holy name, tend to my deities, do whatever service. I'm trying to do a book now of the lectures that Prabhupada Nityagopal, she has spoken on Facebook during the lockdown. I'm gathering that. Dowji also has so many books on Amazon. It's under Dayal, Dowji, in parentheses, Das. He's a disciple of Prabhupada Srila Prem Gopal Goswami, who is my guru's brother. So this is a very sweet line. These are, they're like Nityananda. It's just like being in the spiritual world, and the amount of wisdom, joy, happiness, understanding, the sweetness of their lives, their household life, just, very model behavior, really selfless service, ahaitukiya pratyata, unmotivated, uninterrupted. And you really get to see, you can see where you're at. You can see where you'd like to be going. So blissful life. I don't, in a good life.
Lalita, it's been, I'm conscious we've been kind of chatting for over an hour, but that doesn't matter. It's been just wonderful to listen to all of these things you've been talking about and sharing with us, and some of these wonderful teachings. And I can really feel your kind of transcendental enthusiasm, even though you're thousands of miles away from me right now. I can feel that transcendental spiritual enthusiasm for Krishna consciousness, for the desire to share, for Bhakti, sharing Bhakti with anyone who is willing to experience it. And I think that's wonderful. And yeah, it's been, I think, a real kind of learning, a positive learning curve for me to have you on the podcast this week, and to hear your story. You've been on this kind of spiritual journey at Bhakti, and for me, and I'm hopefully a lot of devotees will just see it's this wonderful journey, that you've gone on from, well, over several lifetimes, but particularly we're talking today from 1967. Yeah, and just to hear some of the things that you've experienced and you've kind of gone through. Yeah, just to say, I haven't really interrupted because I've just been really enjoyed listening to what you've had to say, but just a few things to say. I studied very briefly. I studied the teachings of Kirtanananda Swami when I was at university.
Oh yeah.
Just on that note, I 2005, my dissertation was on, really before I was a Hare Krishna, whatever that means. I did a dissertation on Bhakti Yoga, and I studied the teachings of Kirtanananda Swami with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and that was an interesting task. Yeah, and the other thing, what was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, I know another devotee. There's a devotee in the UK who he's been around Krishna consciousness for 42, 43 years, and he's never been to India. So you might have felt that when you went in 2015, or why were you waiting so long? But he's another kind of character. He hasn't ever been, and hopefully he will one day. I would love to meet your Guru Maharaj or Guru Dev when he next comes to the UK.
Wonderful.
And he's got a growing following, hasn't he, in the UK? He's got some disciples here already, I think.
Yes. He has a lot of Bengali disciples, and there's a disciple of Prem Gopal Goswami ji who is taking Shiksha also from Nityagopal Goswami ji. And, he's been quite active for the last year or so. He's taken Diksha and Shiksha, and he's doing a lot of service. He's not too far from you. He's in Weston.
Is he? Do you know what? I'm not going to say his name because we haven't got permission, but I know who you mean now. And his social media is amazing because his first name begins with D. And Facebook's like one of those things where you don't see, so I saw this particular person 10 years ago at an ISKCON gathering in Bristol, which is kind of near where I live. And then he appears 8 years later or 10 years later with this new initiated name in the Nityananda lineage. And I was, my initial thought was like, good for you. I felt so pleased for him. And because I hadn't seen him for years, and you wonder where devotees go, don't you? And what happens to them. And then suddenly he'd reappeared on social media as a disciple of Prabhupada Prem Gopal Maharaj. So I was very delighted to see that. Yeah, I was very delighted to see that.
Maybe you'll be seeing more of us. I would love to return to UK if if that's Nityananda's desire. It certainly is my desire and my Guruji's desire, and also this devotee. So let's see what the future brings. That's where the
is Prabhupada Nityagopal Goswami, is he returning to the UK in 2023? Do you know?
I hope so, but let's see how it unfolds. It's been like a last minute thing, but always Nityananda has like brought him there at the last moment, and
Yeah.
dramatic. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's been wonderful. You know, I had all these questions to ask you, and I haven't really even asked them because I haven't needed to. You've kind of just gone on this wonderful flow, sharing bhakti with everybody. And it's been wonderful to have you on as the guest on this week's podcast.
My pleasure, really, to be of some service to the devotees. You know, it's just my heart and soul, really, to help wherever I can and just be with devotees. You know, we isolate ourselves too much, and I wanted to say, just, you know, ISKCON, Gaudiya Math, whatever, we just can't isolate ourselves so much. You know, we should not really restrict ourselves to one sangha or one teacher. The paucity, when there's such rich devotee association to be had, brothers have always conducted themselves in congregation in an open, more of an open manner, I think. And from what I can glean historically and, you know, current day, how my Guruji was raised to appreciate all Vaishnavas, he always said, go out and get the blessings of the Dham. If you hear what's going on, go in, sit down, participate, partake. So I think there's lots of projects, you know, that we could be a part of. There are places to explore, holy places that need preserving. There, you know, there's just any number of temples to get to know and to relish the varieties. You know, they say variety is the spice of life. So I think we can be true to our gurus, be true to the philosophical understandings of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and still be open and share and appreciate each other. You know, really be the brotherhood that so many of the acharyas have envisioned, and be so thankful to be under this great umbrella of wonderful faith. It's really about faith, you know, having faith, understanding Radha, Krishna, Gaur, Nitai. They're for us. They love us. They're there for us. They always will be there for us. We can't be afraid. You know, we have to cross through cultural boundaries and understand each other better. It's the peace formula. It's a peace mission. And we really have to be practitioners of peace to show the world that that's what this is about. You know, I don't think you're going to really get to the spiritual world if you're, you know, ornery. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to work on ourselves, each one, and to be as honest as we can be with ourselves, and to seek guidance where we need it, and to be loving. You know, it's about this love that everybody is searching for. And this is a great love. This is our eternal love, our eternal peace. You know, this is it. It's like in this holy name. Hare Krishna.
Well, Lalita, you're preaching to the converted, because I completely agree with you. And I've been saying this for quite some time now, that, you know, if you look at it from a kind of demographic point of view, I think the population, by the way, is 8 billion now, not 7 billion. 8 billion people in the world. It's just been announced about 4 or 5 days ago. And I think the practitioners of Krishna consciousness are around 9 million. I mean, obviously most of those are in India, but 9 million, I'm not a mathematician, but 9 million out of 8 billion is nothing. For the UK, I did some research, and the number of practitioners in the UK came to 0.002% of the UK population. So it was nothing to be, from a kind of pride point of view, it's nothing to be proud of. We've got a lot of work to do to share Krishna consciousness, and all these kind of this desire to worship our institutions or societies rather than share Krishna consciousness just gets in the way. You know, this is my club and that's your club. I don't like that. I've always felt uncomfortable with that. You know, so yeah, you're preaching to the converted.
Well, just glad to, you know, have your association and commonality of the vision that's needed.
Thank you. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody at home, and we can have a brief chat after. So thank you, everyone. A big thank you to Lalita for tuning in, for being our guest this week. It's been wonderful to have her and share her wisdom over so many years. Wonderful, wonderful insights. Thank you to everyone for tuning in to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, please do put a positive comment. Do share it with your friends and family. Please do like it, love it, or care for it. Different emojis you can do on Facebook. And yeah, if you have any questions for Lalita, if you send this channel, this page, a message, and I'll pass them on to her, and privately I can share her contact details as well. So see you all next week. Thanks for tuning in. Hare Krishna.